Making a film isn't just a case of hiring a couple of dashing actors, pointing the camera in their general direction and shouting, "Action!" If it was, Michael Bay would be unable to leave the house in the morning for all the Oscars in his way. It's exactly what your teacher tried to drill into you at school: plan before you start. The process of developing a movie is massive, and a substantial planning stage is essential for making the right decisions about story, character, and tone. It also allows the filmmakers the opportunity to get rid of those less than genius ideas that pop up along the way. Don't believe me? The first draft of this video was just Adam Blompier burping into a microphone for 10 minutes. And on that note, I'm Alex from WhatCulture.com, and here's 8 early drafts that almost ruined great movies. Number 8. The Avengers was almost an adaptation of issue number 1. The real genius of the Avengers wasn't just the bringing together of 4 disparate superhero franchises into one nerdgasm team-up, but of making the film about the real-world question of whether that could actually be done. And that was all thanks to Joss Whedon. When he came on board the project, the original plan was to have a sort of adaptation of Avengers number 1, with Loki using a rampaging Hulk to wreak havoc and only inadvertently bringing the team together. Sure, it's unlikely that Hulk would have found his way to the circus, but the basic idea was there, and it's all a bit silly, so Whedon changed it. But that doesn't mean that there's not clues towards this in the early MCU. Look at The Incredible Hulk. That ends with Bruce Banner on the run and Tony Stark approaching General Ross about bringing a team together. Number 7. Elsa was going to be the villain of Frozen. Disney aren't known for their all-too-faithful adaptations of fairy tales. The Little Mermaid doesn't end with Ariel dissolving, Quasimodo doesn't starve to death, and Sleeping Beauty didn't have children of rape while unconscious. I'm not kidding, by the way, we did a video on it. Although nothing deviates so seismically as their take on the Ice Queen. In the source of Frozen, everyone's favourite princess who endangers an entire country was the villain. And it took a fair few drafts for the studio to change this. In fact, it was only when the villain song wound up making her far too sympathetic that things shifted and she became a more tragic figure. That's right, Let It Go helped Disney let it go. Number 6. Peter Jackson was pitching The Lord of the Rings as 2 films. The Lord of the Rings just has to be a trilogy, right? Well, not necessarily. When Peter Jackson first went to New Line Cinema, he pitched it as a duology, with the first one covering Fellowship and the Two Towers, the second Return of the King. It turns out a pre-planned trilogy just seemed too fantastical an idea in late 90s Hollywood. Eventually New Line did it, because they wanted to make more money, but things could have actually been more extreme. The project had previously been at Miramax, and the Weinsteins wanted to make it as a single film, and to do so they were going to butcher it. They were going to cut out Helm's Deep and make Rohan and Gondor one nation. That is a disaster in the making. Number 5. Luke was going to be the mentor figure of Star Wars The Force Awakens. As you all know, Luke Skywalker wasn't really in Episode 7 all that much. It turns out he's been spending the last 30 years chilling on an island with some rocks, although originally he had a much bigger role. Michael Arndt originally wrote the script with Luke Skywalker in the mentor role in place of Han Solo. On paper this makes perfect sense, but when the writers started trying to actually make the story work, it fell apart. Despite being the most blue milk of the main trio, it turned out Luke was the character you most instinctively wanted to see. As a result, the film shifted to be about the search for Luke, using that desire to see him as an essential plot motivation. It also allowed Han to step into the being killed by the villain role, much to Harrison Ford's delight. Number 4. David Fincher was sent the wrong draft of 7. This one's a little different, because instead of it being a bad idea from an early draft being removed, it's a great dropped idea overpowering the shit that came after. By the time Sister Severin was sent to David Fincher, the film had morphed from a depressing counter to Ernest Hemingway into a standard detective thriller that ended in a thrilling race against time. But, the director of Alien 3 was sent an earlier draft full of heads in boxes, and he actually refused to sign on unless it was this draft that was made, because apparently Alien 3 gave him enough clout to say such things. Thankfully, Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman backed him up. We all got to experience the incredibly gratifying mental image of Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box. Ah, such a feel-good movie. Number 3. Jesus was going to be an engineer in Prometheus. It's no Alien, but Prometheus wasn't deserving of the disparaging response it got upon release. Anyway, to the film itself, and specifically the engineers, the space jockey suit wearing creators of humanity. In the movie, a bunch of scientists travel to a far-off planet in search of the aliens, only to instead discover that they were actually plotting to go attack Earth 2,000 years ago, until the ambiguous effects of the black goo got in the way. The key detail there is 2,000 years, a conspicuously round number that is incredibly coincidental unless the engineers work by the Gregorian calendar. And in an earlier draft, they weren't just using it, they instigated it. That's right, Jesus was an engineer. The original plan was that the creators sent an emissary down to Earth to check up on their little life experiment, only for us to balk at his brilliance and murder him, motivating that waylaid attack. It's an interesting idea, tying the ancient astronaut hypothesis into our modern society, but when you say it out loud it feels incredibly dumb. Let me say it again. Jesus was an engineer. Number 2. Up was nearly a suicide metaphor. Up, Pixar's biggest tearjerker until Inside Out killed Bing Bong. Excuse me a minute. Contrary to what you might expect after seeing the film, the original idea wasn't anything to do with the married life segment, but instead the simple image of a house being carried away by balloons. It was only when exploring the why of the idea that Pete Docter landed on an old widower going on an adventure, although even then things weren't all perfect. The object of the journey was so he could go into the sky and reunite with his dead wife. That's pretty damn dark. This was obviously changed to being about Kevin the Snipe in later versions, mainly because that abstract goal didn't fit the proper narrative and was pretty suicide-y. The house eventually became a metaphor for his unwillingness to let go, which is a lot more fitting of Disney and Pixar. Number 1. Planet of the Apes was almost a futuristic society. Although it took the delectable core concept, astronauts stranded on a strange planet where chimpanzees, gorillas and orangutans rule, the original Planet of the Apes deviated heavily from Pierre Boulle's original novel. In fact, in some ways, Tim Burton's take is more accurate. Doesn't make it any less dreadful, though. The major shift was the sense of scale. The book covered more time, saw the protagonist more integrated into ape society, something we saw done in the reverse with Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and biggest of all, depicted a more futuristic land with cities and flying machines and the like. This wasn't dropped for lack of trying. A first draft by Rod Serling, he of Twilight Zone fame, brought many of the key elements over. The problem was that the budget simply wouldn't allow such grand effects, so things were scaled way back and made more primitive. That sounds really cool, right? At least until you consider it was done in 1968, so unless they had 2001 level effects it would look incredibly dated by now, and that it doesn't actually work with the twist. It's a nuclear ravaged landscape, why the f*** are there massive cities? So there's our list. What other movies were almost ruined by their early ideas? Let us know any we missed down in the comments. Be sure to subscribe for more great film content, and you can follow me on Twitter here. I'll see you soon.